Hello Milwaukee Road fans. In this video I'm going to explain and show how I modified road number 363 with the Rapido Rotary beacon circuit compared to the factory LED driven off the soundtrack soundboard flashing beacon that's on road number 354. The rotary beacon from Rapido gives a more realistic appearance to the rotary beacons as they would have been seen on the Milwaukee Road. After you have installed the rotary beacons circuit, the flashing or blinking light like that's on 354 just doesn't look the same, and it isn't really appealing because it's not very realistic looking as far as the operation. So let's take a deep dive into how to modify your Athearn Genesis Milwaukee Road GP38-2s. To remove the body shell off the Athearn Genesis GP38-2s, you will need to remove the screws that hold the coupler pockets in place. And there's the rear one and also the front one. And also at this time, it's a great opportunity to remove the plastic couplers that are on the model and replace them with some nice, good quality metal couplers of your choice. I personally prefer KD couplers, and that's what I use, but you also may want to replace them with couplers very similar to like Sargent type couplers, but I prefer the KDs. Now with the shell off, you can see that in this new run of Athearn Genesis GP38-2s, there is a new format of a Soundtrack Tsunami 2 PNP type board. Previous Genesis locomotives would have a main board, and then they would use a 21-pin Soundtrack Tsunami 2 decoder. But in this run, they have this modified PNP board. One thing to note out on this new PNP board is that unlike other previous runs of PNP boards, there has been some changes. Typically on a PNP board, your spots here in the corners would be your truck pickups on all four corners of the board. On these new PNP boards, that is not the case. You will want to make sure you really look at the markings on the board. Here we can see the function 8 output is in one corner, the function 7 output is in the other corner, and you have the right rail in one corner and the left rail in the other corner. Also note on these boards, unlike previous runs PNP boards from Soundtracks, typically you would have 12-volt outputs on your outputs. Now that all these locomotives from Athearn now have LEDs, these are all 3 or 3.3 volt outputs. The Rapido rotary beacon is a 12 volt output, and you also will need to reprogram the decoder. In this case, the function 7 output is where the LED is connected right there. For the one, and then your other part right here is where the beacon is attached. The red wire is attached to a resistor on the board to get your 3.3 volt. The black wire is your typical output for your 7th output function programmed on your decoder. So how do you get the 12 volts, you may ask, to get the Rapido? We'll show you here in just 1 second. What you'll need to achieve the 12 volt output for your the PNP type board that's in the Athearn Genesis GP38-2s that were released in 2025 is this cable that is sold with your current keepers from Soundtracks, or else you can also buy this cable separately from Soundtracks. For my case with the Keep Alives, I use these in my trolley models and I'm soldering the keep alives either to the circuit board from Nick's train, or I'm soldering it to an Athearn 21-pin Genesis type decoder board on my trolley models. So I'm already cutting this plug off on my keep alives, and unfortunately in the past I would cut the pigtails real short or right at the plug and throw them out. Wish I would have known that. I'm just going to have this short little pigtail, probably like what I'm showing between my fingers and the end of the plug, and that'll get plugged right into your current keeper plug that's on your Tsunami 2 board. The next step is to remove the cab of the locomotive. Be very careful when you're doing this, as the cab is glued in a couple little spots. You can kind of see the orange paint where the back corners were glued, and also up by the front windshield area, that little notch, and you can see the little paint that was removed from popping the cab off. The way that I did it is kind of hard to hold the phone, but I took and kind of bent the nose gently away from the front of the cab. That will break those two glue joints, and then gently rocking the cab will then slide it up off this groove here that's in your long hood section of your locomotive. And then of course on the inside of the cab here you have 3 wires that are going to the LEDs for the headlights and number boards, and then there's an LED that's into the housing of the rotary beacon. On locomotive 363 I reused the orange clear plastic rotary beacon housing off the Athearn model. I did have to drill it out a little bit to get the Rapido beacon. Reason I did this is I noticed the last batch of rotary beacons that I received from in the Rapido packaging did not have the lenses for the rotary beacons included with the boards. So I'm not sure if that was something that Rapido did on an earlier run or a later run, because all the other packages of the Rapido rotary beacon I purchased came with the orange, a red, and a red, orange, and I think clear, or no, blue housing. And the intent was you could also then use the rotary beacons for first responder type units. And there were some roads, I think, that used a red housing on their beacon on top of their locomotives. So let me tear this apart a little bit more, and I'll get back to you here in a second. Here you can see I have removed the LED from the rotary beacon housing. On this particular locomotive, the location was up kind of close towards the number boards. You can see the hole with the orange kind of showing through the orange countertop. And of course I carefully removed the rotary beacon housing. One of the things you will notice as the hole inside the cab here will need to be enlarged, so the Rapido 4 LED light cluster will be able to fit through into the base of the rotary beacon. And then you also need to drill out the housing to accept the 4 cluster of the LEDs for the rotary beacon. As I mentioned earlier, the Rapido rotary beacon, all the ones that I've been ordering up until just recently all came with the beacon housing, clear plastic parts. You got 2 different types of bases. You have a yellow lens, a red lens, and a blue lens. And then, of course, your LED cluster there by my fingernail that would go through the hole. I recently had found some more of the Rapido Rotary beacon, and this one, that package says Santa Fe style mount, but it does not come with any of the lenses. But in this case, if you can recycle the old lenses, or worst case scenario, if you end up damaging the one from Athearn, you can, I believe Athearn sells replacements, and you can also buy one from Details West that is also hollow, but you probably will have to drill it out. As you can see from the circuit board, it's all pre-wired. You have 2 wires that go to 12 volts, and then the finer magnet wire is the LED light cluster, which is 4 LEDs that are put together so it will simulate the rotating beacon. To enlarge the hole in the cab roof, and also for your rotary beacon housing, it looks like I used a 5/64 inch drill to clean up the hole. Basically, you just want to find a drill that'll allow that LED light cluster to pass through easily, and then also you'll want to recess that LED cluster so it's inside of the housing. As you can see, you'll want to pass the LED cluster through the cab first before you glue it into the LED, or into the orange light housing, because you need to pass that through the cab. Next, you'll glue the LED light cluster into the orange clear plastic rotary beacon housing. On the Athearn model, the beacon is not as tall, so you won't get all of the LEDs into the housing, but you will get enough of the rotation to make it believable. Otherwise, the Rapido, the Rapido orange plastic housings are a little bit taller if your rotary beacon kit from Rapido comes with those parts. Next, I just used a little bit of ACC super glue to glue, like I said, glue the light cluster into the orange housing, and then a little bit also glue the orange housing then back to the cab. I then put a little piece of electrical tape that came out of the model to cover up the hole where the beacon is at. Now comes the fun, is hooking up the 2 wires to from the rotary beacon to your DCC soundtrack circuit board. We'll hook up the black wire to the F7 post. That's where the black wire was before for the rotary beacon LED that was in the model previously. And then the red wire will attach to that little plug that I have to yet plug in, but that little harness here with the black and blue wire, you'll connect the blue wire to the red wire. One of the extra steps that I did with this model, and you don't have to do it, but I did add a little bit of more blue wire just in case I need other 12 volt outputs in the future. I'll cut this wire short because I don't need to have all that wire inside the locomotive model. But I will now solder this red wire off the Rapido board to the blue wire coming off that plug. Always a good practice when you're soldering is to tint the wire ends. You put a little bit of flux on there and put a little bit of pre-solder your wires. It'll make soldering the 2 wires together a lot easier and a lot quicker. And also don't forget to add your heat shrink tubing to one of the wire leads. In this case, my red wire off the rotary beacon, so that way I can slide it to cover the solder joint and then shrink the heat shrink tubing over the wire. It just helps keep things nice and electronics not letting the smoke out. And here we can see that I have the two wires now soldered together, and I can now take my heat shrink tubing. Whoop! I guess I didn't have a good solder joint. Make sure you always check your solder joints before you do your heat shrink. I did a little tug test before I slid the heat shrink tubing over, and a couple different ways. Being that it's such close quarters, I'm just going to use a soldering iron to kind of heat up the heat shrink tubing, shrinking it to kind of go over the wires. If I would have had longer leads, I could have probably used a lighter or some other type of flame to shrink it, but being I don't have much room, you just need to shrink it a little bit so it doesn't slide. Now comes the fun part, putting all that wire nest or rat's nest of wires back into the model, nice and neat. I'll put a little bit of RC car servo tape on the bottom of the circuit board and kind of stick that rotary beacon to the inside of the shell. If you're not sure what servo tape is, it's just double-sided foam tape that's used by the radio control hobbyists, and it's sold in little rolls like this. You can order online or go to your favorite hobby store that sells radio control components. As you can see, I stuck the Rapido circuit board with the double-sided tape just behind the cab there. Now we'll need to change the programming on the F7 output on the decoder. The mapping of the decoder has the beacon on my DCC controller as number 5, but we will need to program the F7 output on the decoder. Looking at the instruction manual that came with the locomotive, we see that the FX7 configuration for the lighting output is CV55. We'll want to reprogram CV55 to 0. This will allow the beacon to work like it is on locomotive 363. Right now 354 still has the LED programming to do the voltage shift on the LED, so that's why the beacon kind of gets bright, gets dimmer, and then shuts off. So we'll change CV55 to 0. So we'll enter in CV55 on our controller, and we'll give it a value of 0. And now we see that locomotive 354's beacon is working like beacon on 363. Nice thing with the Rapido Rotary beacons is you have that nice rotation simulated with the LEDs. Also, what's very neat is you have a dozen or more of these engines just sitting on your layout. Turn the layout room lighting off and just have all your locomotive's rotary beacons rotating around. It's really a neat light show. You don't even have to run your to models, just to sit back and enjoy the light show of these rotary beacons. Hopefully Rapido will be doing another run of these beacons soon. A little bit over, probably about a year and a half ago, when the last batch was released, I luckily was able to order a dozen. I found 3 more on the internet from a hobby store in Canada. Bought their last 3. I'm now down to about 4 or 5 of these kits personally. Still have another Milwaukee Road GP38-2 to put them in, and eventually all my Milwaukee Road engines that would have had beacons in the late 70s, early 80s are going to be getting them. A very neat feature on your locomotive and adds a lot more realism to your models. I hope you enjoyed this step-by-step instructional video on how to add the Rapido rotary beacon circuit to your Athearn Genesis GP38-2s. Thank you.